Did you just call it a mantle?
Yeah.
Nice.
Their websites, you could be a manalist, devoted to making
I have been a
fun of
manalist.
males. But I walked in and I was sitting at a table with some, Bazoolians whose names you might know. And one of them is a county commissioner. And we all looked up at the same time. And it was just a wall of the same man in the same suit. And we were just like, it is 2020. Like, that is so unacceptable.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana College of Business. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. Today we bring you a conversation with three amazing women working together on an exciting and important program here at the University of Montana, the Women's Leadership Initiative. WLI's purpose is to accelerate women's careers of impact. It was initiated by former President Royce Engstrom in 2015 and was relaunched by President Seth Bodnar with generous support of Clearwater Credit Union and private contributions from folks like Denise Grills. In this conversation, we speak with Denise about why she invested in WLI. Denise is joined by psychology professor and department chair Chris Fiore, a key faculty advisor to the program, as well as one of my favorite Missoulians, Glenda Bradshaw, board member of Clearwater and owner of Clyde Coffee. It was great to learn about this important initiative and how it propels women in our community. So let's get into it right now. Okay, so we're here today with Denise Grills, Glenda Bradshaw, Professor Chris Fiore. Ladies, thanks for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
So we are here to talk about the Women's Leadership Initiative, something the three of you are deeply involved in and deeply committed to. Denise, let's start with you. The Women's Leadership Initiative is something that you chose to invest in early on, back under President Engstrom's tenure. Can you talk about why that was something that you wanted to support as a passionate alum of this institution?
Yes. So about 5 years ago, I came onto the University of Montana Alumni Association board. And I think one of our first meetings, President Engstrom was speaking about what was going on on campus. He mentioned that he, and with his wife, had started the Women's Leadership Initiative and talked about that. So I pulled him aside later and said, well, that's, something I'm interested in, working with women in leadership. And as these things go, he asked me to get involved with Dina Monsieur, who was leading the program, and I became involved as an advisor and eventually supporting financially the organization.
Awesome. So integral in that first year and now back as the initiative has been relaunched under President Bodnar, and a big part of it. Glenda, you represent Clearwater in this, but also a lot of personal interest as well, which we'll get to. But you're on the board of Clearwater Credit Union, and Clearwater is one of the driving forces behind making this thing happen, right?
We are. We had the opportunity this year to come in as a financer of the organization, and it's been just a wonderful year to date, and looking forward to the next few events. But, we're a values-based bank, and we know that we have to be more than just a depositor and a lender. We have to be a force for good in our community. And we feel like by supporting initiatives like the Women's Leadership Initiative, we're really living our mission. And we do also feel like we get so much more from it than we put into it. And it's just been a real honor to attend the events and get to know the women in the cohort.
Awesome. And Chris, you're one of the faculty drivers of this whole thing.
Yes. So Dina brought me on for the first one.
Okay.
And we worked together to design and meet what we felt was most important for women. And at that point, it was just University of Montana women who applied to be as a part of the cohort. And it lasted only 1 year, mostly, really needing more, I think, funding and support for it to really be viable. And President Bodnar and the Sea Change Initiative made it possible again this year, and of course Denise as well, and we're so happy Denise is back with us.
Let's talk a little bit about that first cohort. Some of the women in that first cohort, basically like what was the original conception of the WLI, and let's talk about that cohort, because some of those women are just changing the dynamics on this campus and are such leaders in this community?
So the idea behind the first Women's Leadership Initiative actually came from Dina Mansour and Nikki Fiore and their experiences in Southeast Asia as women. And they realized that actually they had problems on campus as women leaders and felt that it was time to do something on campus. And Nikki became actually part of that first cohort, and now she's helping us with this continued effort. So Nikki is really involved in making it happen. Kelly Webster was part of that cohort.
Absolutely.
And now she's chief of staff with President Bodnar. And, I could go through every single person, but you are focusing probably on a few people. Every woman, I think, has taken something from that. We did a lot of training, a lot of support, skill building. We had Power Camp. We really focused on what would help women individually and campus-wide succeed. And I think these women are serious about their potential, and they're showing what they can do.
Yeah. So Power Camp. Denise, tell us about that. It sounds like something that's awesome. Like, I want to do it, but I don't know what it is. What is Power Camp?
Power Camp is a wonderful off-site seminar that a woman named Chris Melching started many years ago to empower women in the workplace. And she put together a program over, 2.5 days that she started and doing with Oracle, which was my employer.
Right.
That we had a chance to do. And a lot of skills, a lot of looking at the whole self, a lot of work, but, very beneficial. And so that program I brought with Chris to Colorado, where I live. She usually does it in California. And then we brought it to Flathead Lake the first time and brought the cohort out. So a chance to all come together and get some training and work together. We are doing it. I'm in Missoula right now. We're going to do one this weekend at Seeley Lake at my family's cabin, my nieces and nephew's cabin. So we will be bringing the cohort and Chris and Nikki out this weekend to all get together.
Super. Chris, have you done Power Camp? Or did you do the first Power Camp?
I did,
Like,
and
what?
I'm lucky.
Can you talk about what happens? Is it password protected?
It's not. A lot of it is about addressing women's empowerment, a lot of ways that women live in the world, interferes, I think, with believing in possibility and potential, and a lot of women will step back or take a longer time or not necessarily believe in themselves. And so Power Camp's all about identifying your strengths, working toward realizing those strengths, and committing to making them happen.
Yeah, can you talk about is it okay to talk about any specific activities? I'm just trying to imagine what happens
So
at
I
this
think
sort
there's
of
things like difficult conversations. What else? Selling yourself. In terms of, how you present yourself, how you present your ideas.
Advocating for your ideas, advocating for yourself. Yeah. Because that's a lot of, what the research shows is a lot of times women are more reticent to advocate for themselves, particularly in corporate situations. Right. Is that consistent with your experience, Denise, at Oracle?
It definitely is, and that's one thing I coach. I think going back to the Sheryl Sundberg Lean In, which has been about 5 or 7 years. I just recently went back and looked at it, but it was the idea through research that she showed that women would apply for jobs they knew they had done, and I'm paraphrasing. Men would apply for jobs they think they could do.
Sure. Yeah.
Or maybe they know they can do because they have confidence.
20 years experience, whatever. I don't have that. I'll apply anyway.
And women were, well, I've done that for already. And so that's one thing I coach and that will coach. Another important thing that I've seen, and I really coach women, but now also men, and Power Camp now is co-ed as well, is that you have to ask.
Yeah.
And that's really important for people that are successful. That I think if you're the top student and then you're the top graduate student, you go into the company or the hot shot or whatever, at some point you get to a level you're not going to get tapped on the shoulder anymore. And so I coach to that. Like, you have to figure out what you want. Let your managers know. Do what you're told you need to do, and then come back and say, okay, I did this, and go forward.
Right.
And I realize in my career that I hurt myself, waiting for someone, to tap me on the shoulder for that next opportunity, because it happened for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's true. And the ladies can say, I don't know if you think it's as true for women or men, because I am coaching now. In particular, I'll give you an example. Like, I work for Oracle. At some point, you get to director, you want to go to senior director, VP, you have to push for it. And I have had many people being frustrated and it didn't happen. And I would say, well, have you done these 3 things? Right. No. We didn't know you had to do that. No one tells you that. And then you go in and ask for the promotion, right? So it's just something true in life that I would, if I had to do all over again, I would ask more.
Sure. Glenda, how does that resonate with your experience, both as an entrepreneur and someone you've worked in large organizations as well?
I think it's really accurate, and it's something that I've seen not only sort of in myself and something I try to be kind of aware of, and certainly when I'm working with other women in an organization, to make sure that I'm helping them advocate for themselves and being an advocate for them. But I think it is very, very, very much true. I think we saw a little kind of 30-second promo, or maybe it was a little longer, before the last Women's Leadership Initiative event that you spoke at, Justin. It was really interesting to see it from a child's perspective about inequality. And, we sort of just have come to grow to expect that maybe we're not going to be paid the same way or get tapped on the shoulder. And as we age, we learn maybe some workarounds. But I thought it was such an important reminder that we don't always start out that way. So I would definitely like to do more working on this in the schools, if possible, because at some point we just sort of lose that understanding that both men and women are capable similarly and equally, because by the time you get to my age, it's pretty entrenched that it would appear from the makeup of boards and senior leadership in most organizations that women aren't equally capable, and I think we all, agree that that's not the case. I think in terms of advocacy, one of the things that I've learned since being part of the WLI is the differences in how corporate America works in terms of advocating for yourself and how it works in an academic setting. And I didn't realize for many of the women who are professors that a lot of their ability to be promoted or get tenure is based on self-evaluations that we're so bad at sometimes, and also on having kind of a mentor or somebody who's shepherding you through the process. So the things that I would like to emphasize and try to emphasize in my own life are being that for other people, and remembering to have confidence in myself, not do sort of the little put downs we do, or not assuming that 20 years of competence in business is not enough. So, I have to remind myself too, but it definitely is a story that I feel like is a more positive story at this point for women in business, but it still needs to be talked about and focused on, but I do think it's improving somewhat.
Yeah, these stories we tell ourselves, they tend to sort of wear grooves.
They
over
do.
time.
They really do.
Yeah. So, Chris, you've been on the faculty here many years, and when you came in, what was it, 2 women in a faculty of 17 or something like that?
Yes, and I replaced a woman faculty. So the environment and psychology, you could imagine, actually is more informed. So in psychology as a field, we've been talking about gender issues. When I was an undergraduate, we were looking at resumes and looking at the studies that talk about if the genders on a resume, we judge them differently.
Sure.
I saw that as an undergraduate in psychology. Psychology has been doing this for a long time. It did not mean that psychology still didn't have gender problems.
Of course.
And so even I came in 1992, and in 1992, there were only 2 women faculty here at the University of Montana in psychology. And the department actually committed from then on to bring on more women and faculty. And that's all that happened, I would say, year after year.
And how did that play out with hiring and so forth?
I would say, well, there are certain ways that it plays out because we have accrediting bodies who ask us to do diversity plans. So I think there's kind of outside forces saying, you need to do this,
Sure.
which is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I also think it's about the people, and the people in psychology really were committed to doing this. And it included, we shut down a search at one time when our final pool had no women in. Everybody voted. Men did not want to go on with the search when the final pool did not have women in it. So I think that's a commitment. I think that's
Absolutely. And you mentioned the accrediting body, maybe sort of giving some cover for decisions like that. Glenda, it makes me think about your role as a board member, a part of the governance structure of Clearwater. You sit in an interesting spot in that you can maybe advocate for some issues that would be more difficult to advocate for from within.
100%. It's a really freeing kind of spot. We're always mindful that there's a staff that has to carry out, all of our strategies and thoughts and wishes. But it's been a really great experience. And we recently just brought Kelly Webster on as a board member.
Right.
There are just 7 of us. And it flipped the board for the first time to a female majority. So we are
Okay.
51% female. But philosophically, everybody is committed on that board to working on equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's a very progressive organization. But some of the stuff that we try to do is remove the need for people of color, women, folks who may be at a disadvantage in the workplace to have to advocate for themselves. So we try to create transparency, and we publish and post all of our salaries. Everybody understands what everybody else is paid, so you don't have to come to me and say, it's come to my attention that I'm being paid far less than somebody. Also gives us the opportunity to fix that on behalf of other people. We're working on an equity and inclusion plan. And so we're working to stay in front of some of these things. The CEO's bonus is partially contingent upon diversity goals and in the workplace. So we're very, very committed to this. Our CEO took a pledge to never be paid more than 10 times the lowest paid employee. I think the current average of most CEOs is over 300 times the lowest paid employee. So we really do try to be very mindful of doing the right things at our level and then have that sort of permeate throughout the organization.
How does that resonate with you, Denise, having spent so much time at a large corporation, Oracle? I mean, some of these experiences have to be parallel to some of yours, and some maybe contradict as well, because you worked for a publicly traded company with a different set of shareholders and stakeholders.
Well, it's very encouraging, and I'm very proud of Clearwater for doing that. I think at Oracle there is, of course, large public company statement of gender, race, sexual orientation, and then more recently veteran success. But again, you're turning a big ship.
Yeah.
And in hiring but if you pay attention to that, I think systemically we always have to look at we don't have why did we end up with a pool of all men where we want to have women? Are we recruiting correctly? Are we stating the real role correctly? But I think it's encouraging, yeah. And when you get firms that really don't have to do everything you're doing legally, that's encouraging as well.
Yeah, and something you mentioned there, Glenda, that made me, it sort of motivated this question. So, when a board or a department switches from majority men to majority women, not only might that sort of change the attitude of the board, but it might change some of the dynamics of how the board actually works. Has that changed at all within your board, or in your department, Chris? Have you noticed just how meetings operate, the norms of communication, leadership, etc.?
I would say definitely, although again, I think psychology is more informed, but I think implicit bias shows us that we're just not all conscious.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not just gender, it's race, etc. So I think there were plenty of things that were going on that just change when you have more representation. So, we have also worked for diversity in more ways than gender. And just as the research shows, I think it's refreshing. I think there's a broad base of ideas and opportunity and possibility that happens with change. I think communication changes. So I couldn't pinpoint exactly how change has happened, but it feels very different than when I started.
Okay. Glenda, do you have a thought on that?
It's a relatively new change, and I think it's really a credit to the credit union and what Jack and the team has built over time. There was a high-functioning board, and it's a very progressive, innovative group that I walked into. So I feel like we've maybe sort of expanded on that. But I will say it's like a pleasure to go to meetings. It's a pleasure to go to working groups. It's an intelligent, professional, civil dialogue of intelligent people. I will say it stands out from most of my other professional experiences, and whether that or not that's because of the female majority or just very thoughtful placement of all board members and the executive team. I imagine it sort of goes beyond the board. I say this before, but the fish rots from the head. And so,
well put.
Yeah, and senior leadership on down, everybody in that organization is just really committed and aligned, and no one's being forced at gunpoint to do the right thing. Like it's just really
it's in the DNA.
It's in our DNA. Yeah. And now the board is just cohesive.
Yeah, and better outcomes.
Oh, I think much better outcomes, better financial outcomes, and of course, sort of every study will say that a diverse organization is a better organization. And there's lots of diversity. I think Chris really hit on it. Like her department functions because there's great diversity, sort of beyond probably gender, which is a big piece of it. But our overall diversity in terms of background and vocation and what people are looking at is really different. So you sort of get everybody kind of, we're all fundamentally aligned on values and where we're going, but then we each have a little different emphasis or specialty. It's a good example of how an organization that is diverse can function and deliver results.
Yeah, it makes it happen.
It does make it. It totally makes it happen. Yeah.
A New Angle is brought to you by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hi, this is Mike Morelli, Director of the Entertainment Management Program at the University of Montana, and you are listening to A New Angle.
So Denise, after a long career at Oracle, like 25 years or something, so now you are coaching.
Yes.
Right? So let's talk about that. I mean, because that in many ways kind of embodies some of the same principles of the WLI, trying to impart the message to a younger generation.
Yes, so I retired from my high-tech life a couple months ago and took some time to think about what I wanted to do. My husband was retired, and we are healthy and, involved. And so I came back to the part of my work as a vice president of, a larger company, managing managers and teams of people, that I always really enjoyed the career coaching, career development. I love the work I do with WLI and some other groups I work with. Almost everybody that's ever reported to me still calls me for coaching, and I'll always continue to do that. So I'm imagining creating Denise Grills Coaching and Consulting and working toward that.
I like that branding.
You like it?
Very clear.
Is it?
I know
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
what you're about.
Yeah.
Sign
Okay,
me
good.
up.
I'm trying it out on you right now. So, which is an important part, right, to get feedback. So I'm starting that, but to be, my own business that I could do for 20 years.
Sure.
And work with groups. So obviously, I always will, work with the University of Montana, and I have a little bit more flexibility now.
Yeah. And so what's a typical kind of client that comes to you seeking advice, and what's your sort of niche coaching wise?
I'm interested in emerging leaders, anyone, who wants to make a change or they feel like they want to make a change. Just by going out to my network and telling people I'm doing it, I just this week had 3 people, you should talk to them, and they can be laid off from a job, but they don't want to just do the same thing again. I could stay with my job, but I just turned 50. That's a big age for that might be my target.
Sure.
People turning 50.
Coach yourself.
Yeah. And so, I've been doing this and I'm good at it, but I don't know if this is what I want to keep doing. And then probably not on a fee basis, but I really enjoy working with younger people who are getting out of school. I spoke yesterday with a friend's son, and he's, very math. I don't even know when he's major. And he's like, but I don't think I want to do that. I think I want to work in entrepreneurial firms.
Okay.
Right. And so I'm introducing him to people in my
Making
network,
connections. Yeah.
people I know from U of M, just to talk with him. So that's kind of what I'm looking at now, but I'm open to suggestions. I'm sort of
Super.
shaping that right now.
Do any of you see differences? This notion of coaching and mentorship, and, it's a two-way street. Sometimes it's somebody in a more senior position saying, hey, you could use some mentorship. You should use some coaching. I'll take you under my wing. Or there's somebody in a more junior situation reaching out and saying, I could really use some help. I'm feeling the need for a coach, a need for a change. Have you observed any differences? I don't want to necessarily restrict it to gender-based differences, but are women more reticent to reach out for mentorship, or do you think that women are actually more inclined to do that?
I was involved in the NSF Advanced Grant that we had on campus. It was, we called it the PACE Grant, and it had a mentorship component to it. And it was about advancing women and minorities in science.
And when was this grant work happening?
Boy. It was in, I would say, 2000, maybe 3 to 9.
Okay.
It was wonderful for us. We did a lot of really good things, and actually the Faculty Development Office was something that came out of it.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes. And as did our partner accommodation policy and the modified duties for people during faculty during pregnancy and family leave.
Okay.
So we accomplished a lot.
So important structures
Yes.
and policies.
Yes.
Yes, wonderful.
But in our mentoring, we did a lot of research on what works, what doesn't work, what's going to help women. And women actually really appreciate and welcome mentoring. The difficulty, especially at that time, was that few people offered it. Mm-hmm. Remember, there weren't that many women
Yeah.
in especially sciences and on campus. You think psychology was something with 2 of 17. We had science programs with 0
Right.
women. So there was a lot of work to be done. What we know is that natural mentors work best, so people that you automatically connect with, maybe within your department, outside your department, outside the university, somebody who really is more senior who can help you navigate. They're not always there. It's not always possible. So in the recommendations of that program, and what we did is we did assign mentors, and that was really good for everybody. So at a minimum, assign them. If there's natural mentors, great. But
Sure.
if there aren't, assigning a mentor is good for both people.
Yeah, sometimes
We-
it needs to be made explicit. Like, this is
Yes.
part of your job to do this.
Yes.
Make time.
We, after that, as a psychology department, we assign mentors to men and women, junior faculty. It doesn't matter. Everybody gets a mentor, a senior faculty, because there's so much to know.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't possibly figure it all out or know it all. And it's really a relief to have somebody walking with you through it.
Yeah. Glenda, any thoughts on the coaching piece? I mean, I know you advise a lot of folks, and you've invested in your own development and education at various stages in your life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun. And just listening to Denise talk about how much pleasure, she gets from doing it, and how many of the folks that have worked for her in the past continue to come back, because obviously what you're adding to their lives and to that dialogue is a help. I do think that everybody at some point in their career needs somebody assigned. I think that organic mentoring is great. And I think once you sort of get comfortable in that role, you can get there. But I know personally that had I not been placed in an executive leadership development program when I was at FedEx and assigned mentors who were EVP and SVP and the CEO, my career and my development would not have progressed nearly so quickly. There are a lot of, smart, hardworking, deserving people in a large, field leadership or organization like that. I think there were 30,000 employees. And fortunately, I got into this program and I got assigned the right mentors, and they really worked with me. And it's something that we talked about last time. But I feel like in particular, having a female mentor who said, be yourself. And these are skills that you have that other people don't have. And these are important skills.
Right.
So do not change how you communicate. Do not change how you dress. Do not change who you are fundamentally. You can't. That's not a great place to be. And just to be really confident in who you are, because it's good. So I was really fortunate in not just that I had a mentor, but who she was and how she messaged to me. And the way she messaged to me is how she messaged to other people who were making hiring decisions. It wasn't like Glenda would be great if. It was Glenda is great because. And I try to do that, for other people as well.
Yeah, and it gives you license to be.
Oh, it totally
true to
does.
yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can imagine the moment that the sort of just must have brought such ease.
Oh, it
your
absolutely does. And it's not to say there aren't things that I can and should change and work on, because that I absolutely can improve in a million different ways.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the predominant narrative. It wasn't sort of this sort of like, let's look at the 3 things that you could do better.
Right.
Like we are going to look at those, but we're going to focus on this other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this cohort in this year's WLI. It's a unique cohort in that with Clearwater coming into the team, are there 1 or 2 Clearwater employees? Do you call them
Rachel and
employees,
Erica.
or they got some
Co-workers.
fancy co-workers?
It's fancy.
Yeah. Well, that's not that fancy. You can do better than co-workers.
We could get fancier.
Yeah, I don't know what. Something very woke.
Comrades.
Comrades. Yeah. Okay.
Your jacket is a little,
Is it comrade?
Yeah, a little.
This is a podcast, so
Yeah.
people can't see the jacket.
Oh, I apologize. Justin is wearing, it is camouflage, but it has sort of a military kind of Cuban cut.
Cuban cut. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my Bernie Sanders attire.
Okay.
Anyway, let's not go there. Okay. So we're talking about this year's cohort. So we got 2 Clearwater co-workers.
Yeah.
And a bunch of awesome women from the UM community. What are some things you're excited about with the attributes of this particular cohort?
So one of the things, having been with both cohorts, the women are always amazing.
Yeah.
And this time with the 2 women from Clearwater being part of the group, I feel like it's really good for everybody, because we're not just talking about UM problems or UM-focused issues.
Yeah, it's got to add a richness to the dynamic.
Really nice. And there are times where we might veer toward UM focus because it's 10 and 2, but it never stays there. And I think the presentation that we did, was it last week or the week before, the workplace equity event, is a great example of what can happen when you're just talking about this issue of workplace equity. It applies across the board. Yeah. It's not a UM solely issue. And I just thought it was rich how deep everybody chose to go by looking for women and anybody's stories about workplace inequities and then presenting them to the group and having discussions about them. That came from everybody's heart and soul and experience. Some of those stories around the room in that event were women from the cohort. We also asked for people from the community to contribute stories. And then those stories that were selected, the 7 that were selected to be read, some were stories from women in the cohort, some were not. But I think it just represents the powerful approach that is really desired this time. People are looking for action. They're looking for change. They don't want to just talk about it, and it's not just about them.
Right.
And not the last cohort either. The last cohort worked on the big problems happening at UM.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that it was all about them. It's just that this time it's not just about UM. This time it's about the issue of workplace equity, which is a huge problem in our culture.
So let's talk about, I just remember that event you're talking about, Chris, and it was a powerful event. And some of the conversations that I think were antecedents to that event were, some men in this community wanting to sort of figure out, like, can we help in any way with this? Because I feel like there are times where men don't know how to engage around this stuff. Like, I want to be part of the solution, but I don't know how. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be canceled, whatever it is, right? And that might be a little too pithy, but what advice might you have for men who want to get involved?
Oh, I think there's a lot of ways that men can be involved. And first of all, I think just sort of as a group, recognizing that as many men, want things to operate equitably, as those children did in the video before that equity event started, as women do. So I do believe. Well, I guess first and foremost, I would like to just say that I think we have a lot of allies, and that I don't think it breaks entirely along gender lines that women want to operate a certain way and men don't. But I do think that when there are men operating, whether it's implicit bias or outright bias, and it's in a meeting or it's in a hiring situation, I think it can't just be women who come forward and say something. So I think what men can do in those situations is have their eyes open, and if you notice it, say something, and don't leave it just for the women to fix.
I think about that, and not to cut you off there, Glenda, but I think about that in meetings. I'll be in a meeting where, the men will just sort of talk, whereas and the women will raise their hands and sort of wait to be acknowledged by the leader of the meeting. And observing this, I think, well, okay, if I were leading the meeting, maybe I've been more explicit about calling on people. But as an observer, like, should I speak up and say, hey, you just talked over your female colleague? Or that feels right on some levels, but on the other level, it feels problematic in that it's like taking a man to come to the rescue of this woman in distress.
I totally agree. I think it has to be kind of a group effort. So I think, we don't need rescued, but we also, don't want to be abandoned in those meetings. And it really is, I think, a minority of people who are doing it. And I think if the majority of people pipe up and say something, I would like to imagine it'll change. Just recently, it was interesting when I walked into the women's equity event, and then it was an all-male panel up there. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Because I'd just been at a Missoula Chamber event where there was a non-ironic panel about the economic state of Missoula.
Did you just call it a manel?
Yeah.
Nice.
Their websites, you could be a manalist, devoted to making
I have been a
fun of
manalist.
manels. But I walked in and I was sitting at a table with some, Bazoolians whose names you might know. One of them is a county commissioner, and we all looked up at the same time, and it was just a wall of the same man in the same suit, and we were just like, it is 2020. Like, that is so unacceptable. And the whole table was just like eye-rolling. They were just like, everybody was outraged. The whole table, men, women, everybody.
Yep.
And then, the next week I got a message from that commissioner saying, Glenda, why don't you come in? It'd be really fun to connect. I want to see what you're doing. And then I left that meeting, and somebody called me from the county, and they said, that commissioner would like you to be on a steering committee for healthcare. Would you be interested in doing that? I said, well, I'd be absolutely interested in doing that. But it was great because it wasn't just me being like, I am outraged. Everybody was just like, that is ridiculous.
Yeah, 2020
and then he
people.
did something about it.
Yeah.
There was a female at the table who he wanted to talk to about, business and making things better in our county, and thought I might have something to say. And then he utilized my skills, which have nothing to do with healthcare, but it'll be fun to be on the steering committee, and hopefully we can do something good. But I think that's how you make it work.
Sure.
You include people. You notice when something isn't right, and you do something differently.
Well, much like Clearwater, you recognize that you
Totally.
get better outcomes if you have
Yeah.
a more diverse group of people making decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was great. I was impressed.
Yeah, please do.
So one of the things that I didn't say about that workplace equity event was that we didn't really want male allies, and that was the whole point. And the stories that were women's stories were read by men, yourself included.
Mm-hmm.
And the power in that alone, I think, it was the most quiet group of 170 people I've ever been around.
It's pretty intense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was really powerful. And the idea was that a lot of people don't listen to women telling their stories. If men told those stories, not only would they listen, but they probably would notice it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
So it magnified what was going on. I thought it worked well. There was a lot of anxiety about whether it would work well, but I think it worked well.
I certainly felt a lot of, I speak in public often, and I don't think it's totally easy, but I was pretty nervous, even though I had a script to read. But just the intensity of the moment, and for whatever reason, I had to go last. But yeah, it was a pretty powerful event.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's bring this ship into harbor here. Denise, put you on the spot a little bit. I mean, you've gone through a lot of life change in the last couple of months. How do you think something like WLI lives on at a place like University of Montana? And what are you interested in doing to help with that?
Ideally, we'll get to a place where we don't need separate leadership groups, and we don't need separate programs for veterans or, sexual equality or anything, But I think as we move forward, it would be a great victory to get there. That being said, when I was a student on this campus in the 70s, since that time, there are more women than men in higher education.
Yeah.
But they're still, 40 years later, not at the high level or at the high level of corporations or boards. So I think we just keep working toward that. And at one point, we don't need, if we didn't need WLI, that would be great. And we just worked on, leadership across the board.
Let's put ourselves out of business.
Let's put ourselves out.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Let's put ourselves out of business there.
I like it. Glenda, how will you stay involved?
Well, I'm hoping that the credit union funds this year after year after year, and that we're invited to participate in some of the events as we have been this year. I think long term, I've met people in the community and through this initiative that hopefully will be lasting connections. And then I think, ultimately, Kelly's on the board, and I think we're going to try to do more things with the university, and, looking forward to seeing all the good things that happen out of the initiative.
Awesome. Chris, any closing thoughts from you?
I would say that we've really been fortunate to have people identify this as a need and support it. And I'm hoping that people continue to see that we are still at a place that we need it. I think there's a potential to expand it. But I also know that because of this effort, the campus is picking up more on leadership education needs, both in the new staff and faculty training programs, and with undergraduate students with leadership programs. I think we need good leaders, and we need them across the board. So I think recognition of that is happening, and we are one result of that.
Indeed. And speaking of good leaders, I think we have 3 wonderful ones in this room. And I thank you all for the great work you're doing to advance this initiative, but also just for coming in here and sharing the story with our listeners. Thanks very much. And enjoy Power Camp.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thanks.
All right. Hope you learned as much from that as I did. Check out umt.edu/women's-leadership-initiative to learn more. Maybe even apply for next year's cohort yourself. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps. Our awesome interns, Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson, Jeff Ament, John Wicks, and VTO for the tunes, and finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.